Welcome to the donations page for the Wheels 2016 Summer Fundraising Campaign. Since you're here, we know already that you value the work of our journal. In just a short time, the Wheel has established itself as a leading publisher of high-quality reflection on the Orthodox Church, its past, present and future. We have heard from all over the world that you value your subscription to the Wheel. You enjoy the insightful contributions of our authors. You appreciate holding in your hands a high-quality print publication. You share our website and social media presence with your friends, family and colleagues. If you believe in a lively conversation about Orthodox Christianity that is pursued with both passion and respect, if you want to continue encouraging debate and discussion to help the Orthodox Church meet the global challenges posed in our new century, then please make the work of the Wheel possible through your financial support.
There is this publication, everybody, The Wheel. I know, actually, this is not the issue that's at hand. Did you show the elephant?
I did.
You did, right? So let's put the elephant up here where we can see it. Like, maybe here is enough. I don't want him to get in the way here of our Christ icon. So, anyway, so there is an elephant in the room, everybody.
Yes.
I hope you enjoy that image. So, there was an article in the latest issue of The Wheel. By the way, high quality thing here. We subscribe. Also, we get the hard copy, but it's an online journal. You could look it up, The Wheel Online Journal, okay? Before you get upset about this somehow, maybe you're not going to get upset about it, but I would urge us that this is not something to get upset about, all right? The issue is on, Rob, you had this somewhere.
Yes. The issue is, let's see, the theme being human, embodiment and anthropology, sex, marriage, and theosis.
All right, so it's like gender issues, sex issues in Orthodoxy. This is what the latest issue is on, okay? And some heavy hitters in Orthodox theology, like Professor Father Andrew Louth, yes, the Oxford professor and also professor at Durham, a good friend of mine actually, who, I'm often in correspondence with him. He wrote me just today. Metropolitan Kallistos Ware wrote the foreword to this issue. Everybody knows the name of Metropolitan Kallistos Ware. Father John Bear, professor and dean, until recently I believe, of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Seminary. I could name other names from this issue. I haven't read all the articles, okay? But I did read the foreword by Metropolitan Kallistos. And I read the excellent editorial by Father Andrew Louth. These are minds and hearts that are brilliant, everybody, and that are not to be taken lightly. These are people who have contributed a lot to Orthodox mission in this world, particularly amongst thinking people, amongst intelligent people. You might take pause before sinking your teeth into something that he said or questions that he asked. See, in this issue of The Wheel, Metropolitan Kallistos actually just asks questions. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but in a way that a thinking person does. He asks questions with regard to some things that look different to us today in the area, for example, of homosexuality and life decisions based on someone who has, what some say you can't call it sexual orientation, but for lack of a better term, I'll use that term. Someone who has been given that kind of sexual orientation. He talks about some questions that occur, as he says, where we enter difficulty, he says. but he doesn't give an answer to this, okay? So what I'd like to suggest is, can we perhaps not be ready to tear into someone who has, perhaps also on occasion of Father's Day, has been a father to so many? If we disagree, perhaps, or if we are afraid of certain questions being asked, can we give the benefit of the doubt, perhaps, to one of our own? Or are we going to be so quick, as some have been, some bloggers and some of these voices in Orthodoxy that aren't, I'm sorry, but they are not the peers. They are not peers to this great scholar, nor are they the peers to a scholar of the magnitude of an Andrew Louth. Father Andrew Louth, in his turn, I'm suggesting a little bit of humility, perhaps, with regard to people who do know their stuff, okay, and don't say things lightly. I wanna suggest to you, everybody, to read, if you're gonna get into this, because it is a valuable issue. You don't have to be in agreement with all of it, but it's an exercise in articulating certain questions that people do have. Young people also have these questions, okay? And they're getting answers elsewhere. So we can behave, as Father Andrew Louth quotes someone else saying, it's a very funny joke. He says, we can behave like as the double-headed Byzantine ostrich, sticking our head in the sand or just having a very stiff neck. He says we don't have to behave as the double-headed Byzantine ostrich when we're faced with questions or challenges. Why are we faced with challenges and questions? Why are there? Some people want to pretend that there aren't questions. We have all the answers. There are changes that have been brought about not by us, not by, groups of feminists or homosexuals or anybody who planned these changes, but changes that have come about because of changes in technology. And an example that Father Andrew Louth mentions is the breaking of the link that has happened between sexual intercourse and childbearing. Okay? That link was broken, I think mainly because of the invention of the pill, right? There were also other shifts because of the 2 world wars in the professional positions of women, where women were given more responsibilities, women were compelled to be allowed to receive higher education, and now globalization, the accessibility of of a vast variety of cultures and ways of thinking, all of this stuff now in the internet age has shifted the way we perceive things, the way we perceive authority, the way we express ourselves. But the other things I mentioned raise issues that were not raised before. Specifically also about sexuality, the whole aspect of life that has to do with gender, gender identity, gender roles. These things actually change in the way society approaches them, and also we can't pretend that they don't change within the church when we say that they've changed in society. So you have to face these questions as church already, as the questions are posed in a new way, in a new light. He says it's very strange that the challenge of these questions is perceived by us Orthodox, is perceived to be coming from the outside, from the culture and society that surround us, almost as if we were not ourselves part of them. And I love that insight. He says, why do we perceive these as if they're threats from the outside? Aren't we part of these changes? Don't we in our midst have these changes and changed perceptions? Of course we do.
Но сегодня с новой и новой силой, уже в масштабах целой планеты, развивается эта идея жизни без Бога И мы видим, как предпринимаются усилия, в том числе на законодательном уровне во многих процветающих странах, законом утвердить право любого выбора человека, в том числе и самого греховного, идущего вразрез со Словом Божиим, с понятием святости, с понятием Бога. И как результат, опасное явление в жизни современного человечества. Это явление получило название дехристианизация. И, наверное, эти бы философские взгляды нельзя было бы назвать ересью, если бы очень многие христиане не приняли эти взгляды и не отдали приоритет человеческим правам более, чем Слову Божьему. И поэтому мы сегодня говорим об глобальной ереси человекопоклонничества, нового идолопоклонства, исторгающего Бога из человеческой жизни. И ничего подобного в глобальном масштабе никогда не было. И именно на преодоление этой ереси современности, последствия которой могут иметь прямые апокалиптические события, сегодня Церковь и должна направлять силу своей защиты, силу своего слова, силу своей мысли. А все это мы формулируем очень просто. Мы должны защищать православие.
You know, it's like in the parable of the leaven or of the yeast, which a woman put into a dough until it permeated the entire dough. That's what the church is in this world. You can't separate it. It's God's will that the church is to permeate the dough that is the whole world. And us as members of church and being in this world is us following in the footsteps of our cross-carrying Lord. We are called to self-offering. Okay, this does involve suffering in this world. All right, Christ's self-offering is supposed to shine through us, not through us trying to be special in the wrong way. You know, special in the way of sticking our heads really in the sand to real and agonizing shifts, all right? Shifts in the way we perceive things. We have not brought about some of these changed perceptions. You know, you could say what you want and forbid all you want, something like contraception or worse, yes, the horrible reality of and accessibility of abortion, but you can't ignore that entire generations are growing up, okay, with easy access to these things, and God knows that makes it a lot more difficult for people, not only women, but you know, the way that they perceive sex and sexuality, and the way they really perceive their freedom, and some of, you know, the responsibility is much heavier and more difficult in our time. And God sees all these things and will judge us accordingly, according to his mercy. But for pastors of the church to pretend that nothing has changed, that nothing has to be looked at anew because of this break, like I said, and like Father Andrew noted, the breaking of the link, he says, between sexual congress, he calls it, it's a little bit funny, sexual congress, yeah, and childbearing. See, this is not something that we have brought about because we planned it so, but it's done. That link has been broken. Finally, this is my main point when I made this appeal to have to give the benefit of the doubt to some academic theologians who do bear the cross of, first of all, of seeing the gray zones, because some people don't really see gray zones. You know, they see in black and white. So, you know, they just maybe are not burdened with too much information or knowledge or understanding. But it does cause one suffering to see certain problems, okay? And a great mind like Metropolitan Kallistos or Father Andrew Louth does suffer from recognizing the nuances.
Здравствуйте, с вами Екатерина Грачева. Это программа «Церковь и мир» на канале «Россия-24», в которой мы беседуем с митрополитом Волоколамским Иларионом, председателем отдела внешних церковных связей Московского патриархата. Здравствуйте, владыка.
Здравствуйте, Екатерина. Здравствуйте, дорогие братья и сестры.
Владыка, в эти дни из Швеции пришла вот такая новость, что отныне церковь этой страны будет использовать исключительно гендерно-нейтральные слова, говоря о Боге. То есть обращение к Нему как к Господу останется, а вот обращение к Нему, скажем, как к Отцу, отныне под запретом. А как же быть во имя Отца и Сына и Святого Духа? Как будет это формулировать Церковь теперь?
Вот мы не случайно разорвали всякое общение с так называемой церковью Швеции в 2005 году, после того, как они в своей литургической практике ввели благословение так называемых однополых союзов. А сейчас, например, епископом Стокгольма в церкви Швеции является женщина, которая живет в открытом лесбийском союзе. В христианстве есть такие вещи, которые могут меняться, а есть вещи непреложные. И это касается, во-первых, вероучения, во-вторых, нравственности. Та ревизия церковного предания, которая происходит сегодня в некоторых крайне либеральных протестантских общинах Севера и Запада, она затрагивает и ту, и другую область. То есть, с одной стороны, они отказываются от традиционной христианской нравственности в пользу современных либеральных стандартов, а с другой стороны, они пытаются и вероучение, и литургическую практику подверстать под эти новые либеральные политкорректные стандарты. И вот в свое время, 500 лет назад, когда началась реформация, Мартин Лютер провозгласил принцип «sola scriptura», то есть буквально в переводе с латинского «только писанием». И это означает, что во главу угла должно быть поставлено Священное Писание. И Лютер говорил о том, что все, что в Священном Писании, оно непреложно. А вот все, что является предметом традиции и предания, оно может меняться. Но если быть последовательным в этом подходе, то как раз протестанты и должны были бы сейчас защищать то, что в Священном Писании нам передано самим Иисусом Христом. А в Священном Писании, в Евангелии от Матфея, мы ясно читаем о том, как Господь, посылая учеников на проповедь, сказал им: «Пойдите, научите все народы, крестя их во имя Отца и Сына и Святого Духа». Он не сказал во имя матери и дочери, он не избрал какие-то гендерно-нейтральные формулировки, хотя еврейский язык, на котором он говорил, позволял это сделать. Он сказал об Отце, Сыне и Святом Духе. И когда ученики обратились к нему и сказали: «Научи нас молиться, как Иоанн Креститель научил своих учеников», то он им сказал: «Молитесь так: Отче наш, сущий на небесах». И дальше произнес ту самую молитву «Отче наш», которую все мы, и православные, и католики, и протестанты по всему миру, читаем с тех самых пор на каждом богослужении и в нашей домашней молитве. Я думаю, что самый лучший способ для таких христиан – это покинуть эту церковь и найти ту церковь, где сохраняется и Священное Писание, и церковное предание, восходящее к Иисусу Христу и Его апостолам.
Владыка, как вы прокомментируете новость о том, что во Франции разрабатывают законопроект о снижении возраста сексуального согласия с 15 на 13 лет? То есть теперь за занятие сексом с девочкой, мальчиком 13-летнего возраста судить не будут.
Наши церковные эксперты уже давно говорили о том, что вслед за признанием однополого сожительства нормой и приравниванием его к брачному союзу между мужчиной и женщиной будут приниматься решения, направленные на легализацию педофилии. И нам все в один голос говорили, ну что вы, это совершенно разные вещи, ни в коем случае одно не будет следовать за другим. Но сказав А, надо говорить Б. И у тех законодателей, которые идут по этому пути, у них есть своя логика. Они идут по пути сознательного демонтажа тех нравственных запретов, которые существовали на протяжении веков и которые были прежде всего обусловлены религиозным сознанием. Вот когда демонстративно отказываются от религиозного основания для законодательства, тогда, собственно, и запреты эти исчезают. Ведь речь в подобного рода законах идет не только о том, что мальчик и девочка в 13-летнем возрасте решили друг с другом вступить в половую связь, и за это их не посадят в тюрьму. А речь идет о том, что педофил теперь может иметь доступ свободный к 13- и 14-летним девочкам и мальчикам. По сути дела, речь идет именно о том, чтобы узаконить педофилию, к чему на протяжении долгого времени либеральное европейское законодательство шло.
Большое спасибо, владыка, за эту беседу.
Спасибо, Екатерина.
Those of us who will easily attack someone who steps outside our box of thinking, and I'm not talking about speaking heretical things. No, I'm talking about certain issues of a pastoral nature and of a nature that involves church discipline that can be exercised in different ways according to economia, okay? God's building up of his house. There is that principle in Orthodoxy. For example, allowing for heterosexuals to get married, not once, not twice, sometimes even 3 times, okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 19. And indeed, writes St. Paul, there must be differences or factions. Heresies, he writes. Now, that's the word for heresies, but it means, in the context of first century Christianity, there must be differences or factions among you to show which of you are approved, or dokimi in Greek, which of you are approved or are tested and reliable. Okay. Listen, I think the Gay Pride Parade is upon us, is it? So you've seen a bit of Vienna today, everybody. It's the Gay Pride edition episode of Coffee with Sister Vassa, right?
Yes.
Now that's going to be quoted in the interview.
Kako se zove hod počasti, ne znam kako, ponosni hod, nego to je hod srama. Mi smo mnogo i dovoljno posramljeni i ne moramo sami sebe da posramljujemo. A to je sram. Ja shvatam i verujem da i vi mnogi shvatate slabosti ljudske grehove i ljudske nedoslednosti. Ima stvari koje ljudi čine, ali u mraku, u zatvorenoj prostoriji, da ih niko ne vidi. To je njihov problem. Neka zato Bogu odgovaraju. Ali nemojte da nam nameću sram, da se ponosimo, da im plešemo rukama i da ih čuvamo, nažalost, od naroda hrišćanskoga, kome je to veliki sram. Mi smo danas nosili u litiji naš simbol, krst. I hvala Bogu, vidim, učestvuju svi narodi, svi predstavnici svoga naroda, jer to je ponos i radost i blagodat Božija. A čime se, nažalost, oni ponose? Ne smem da bude vulgaran, ali mora da bude vulgaran. Njihov simbol je gola zadnjica na sramotu i njihovo i našu. To ne sme srpski narod da dopusti. Da se molimo Bogu da izmenimo misli, da se oduhovimo, da se duhovno preobrazimo.
But what I'm not suggesting doing something different. I'm suggesting that we look at the way in which the fathers really approached this, instead of just looking at the arguments that they used with people who got it wrong.
So,
That makes sense.
as I understand, well, not entirely, because the way I understand what you have described, Father Andrew, is that it is prayer that leads us to ask questions about who God is, and not vice versa. Because
Yeah.
I think that in postmodern day Orthodoxy, one gets the impression sometimes, but it's not official or anything, but I inhabit a world that is very much online, not all the time, but it is church discussions and church related discussions. Now, one gets the impression that Orthodoxy has all the answers. Now, when one has all the answers, then questioning in the first place, and I'm not talking about questioning, I'm talking about being more and more curious about God insofar as we love him. It's like being curious about your beloved and wanting to know more. And so, like when Thomas says, I will not, I will not believe unless I touch him. Well, this is not an example of any kind of betrayal or I would say of weakness of Thomas's commitment. It is an engagement. It is a will to know the Lord. But in our day, any kind of posing of questions, particularly by, I would say, leading theologians. There wasn't so long ago a whole uproar about something that the great Metropolitan Kallistos wrote. I don't need to remind you of that. And so even posing questions seems to be not something that a lot of people would agree comes from prayer. And I love that you make this connection between, a prayer life actually leading to the asking of questions because it matters and because we don't have all the answers. Also, I think on a communal level, because the church continues to discern. I'm sorry that I have started this whole tirade because we do want to listen to you, but I would love for you to clarify that so that, because you began with a sort of critique of theology being, or God being sort of studied first as some kind of a concept, rather than these questions coming from prayer and a desire to know him. If you could get back to the questions, how is asking questions about God and actually saying, I am still growing in getting to know the answers. How is that congruent with or in sync with piety?
Sometimes I think one can sometimes make a distinction between what the church believes, which is a result of its experience over millennia, and in some ways the councils are kind of landmarks of where we are. But each of us then have to make it our own. And making this our own is a process. I think the other thing too, thinking about the tirade against Bishop Kallistos, I felt that almost everything that I read that wanted to, in attacking Metropolitan Kallistos, attacked him out of fear. There was fear for all sorts of reasons. I mean, fear of some kind of landmarks being sort of removed, as if this kind of fear of what might happen next. Just if our questioning grows out of our prayer, then it will be, as you said, these will be the questionings of one who loves and wants to learn more about who it is that he loves. And we're learning more and more about who Christ is.
seksualna sloboda vodi ka porobljavanju čovjeka seksualnim nagonima. Sve se više čak i u obrazovanju forsira na rani razvrat i seksualnost, bez obzira na opšte ljudsko iskustvo koliko je pogubna za čovjekovo zdravlje prevremena upotreba bilo čega nezreloga i neprevreloga, pa i toga što ova revolucija novog, prastarog u stvari paganskog totalitarizma obesmišljuje osveštanu svetinu braka, razara porodicu, ukida monogamiju, u ime individualnog polnog zadovoljstva pretvara materinu utrobu iz radionice života u radionicu smrti, legalizuje sve seksualne izopačenosti od sodomije do pederastije. Toliko prije se crkva svim svojim bićem i svjedočenjem protiv prirodnom, beslovesnom i jalovom raspaljivanju muškog na žensko, muškog na muško i ženskog na žensko. Mainstream, možda je savremena televizija i drugi mediji ostali globalni trovači u širenju ove totalitarne zaraze na način bez presedana u istoriji. Pornografija i sve njene nastranosti od homoseksualizma do pedofilije postali su iznosi koji se mjeri milijardama.
It's opposed to a kind of simple, a kind of familiarity, which is almost bordering on contempt. That's what it's against.
Right, holding, taking for granted, perhaps, yes?
Like taking for granted, as it were. There's something we can't take for granted. But fear, a kind of superstition is often fear as well. Fear that you haven't sort of ticked all the right boxes, so you tick every single one. That sort of thing. And I think I feel that change that one cannot control or cannot understand very often leads to a kind of fear.
Right.
And I think that fear of change, because we are not confident in the love of God.
Thank you for that. I think that's very helpful.
I mean, I think that is something which is we need to preach. I mean, we need to tell people that we don't need to be afraid. It doesn't mean to say there's nothing to do, but we don't need to be. When we look at the world around us, look at sort of the big, things like climate change and the possibility of 10, 20 years' time there'll be nowhere to live because already. I just read the other day that in the last 5-6 years, several Pacific islands no longer exist because of the rising temperature of the earth. These are huge things, which it's very easy to respond with this kind of fear, and sometimes a fear that says, "Well, I don't believe it. I'm not going to have to do with it. I don't want to know about it." But if we can genuinely believe what we say we believe in God's providence, we believe that we can be confident in a God who loves us and who looks after us in his providence, then I think we'll be able to find ways of dealing not just with the problems of the church, but I think also the problems of the world, because fear is paralyzing and love is enabling.
Jer da nije postradao za nas, mi ne bi mogli ni znati da je on zaista ljubav. I ne bi mogli prepoznati i priznati njega kao Boga. Jer šta će nama Bog koji ne zna našu muku, naše stradanje, našu okovanost smrću i prolaznošću. Takav Bog je neki daleki tuđi Bog.
anyway, Father Andrew, thank you so much for indicating, the changeability also in the church might instill fear into us.
You wrote a response to Metropolitan Kallistos Ware's foreword in The Wheel.
I did. Reluctantly. Reluctantly, I did.
What kind of clarity on that subject with the whole same-sex marriage in the church and how the church should approach that? What kind of clarity on the matter do the faithful in the church need?
I think there are several points of clarity that are helpful for different members of the Orthodox Church. I think the first point of clarity is to continue to repeat and to state without any equivocation what has been said by the scriptures and the undivided tradition of the church on the matter of sexual relations between members of the same sex. And there is no place in the entire history of Christendom, or even going beyond that, a bit before that in Judaism, where this has been seen as something that is ever according to the will of God. So to use the old-fashioned term, sodomy and all the activities that go along with it are seen as contrary to what God did in the beginning, which was to make them male and female. And this isn't just a matter of a few weird verses in Leviticus. It's a tradition that's found right through the scriptures, right through into the letters of the New Testament, right through into the disciplinary canons of the church. And it's because this is a foundational issue with regards to how God made humankind. So that's the first thing that I think needs to be clearly stated at all times. But it's probably not enough. I think that alongside of that, too, we need to have a clearly stated approach to those people who are tempted in this regard, to those people for whom sexuality seems uncertain, to those people who are either struggling against acting out, or who are falling into acting out, or who are tempted to follow the ways of the world and think that acting out in a homosexual way is a viable option for Christians. So I think that we have to have a pastoral response to that is clear but unequivocal and not in contradiction to the tradition. And then the third thing that I think that we need is to really, and this is something that I think has not been done in the past because we haven't had the same challenges as we do now. I think that we need to delve more deeply into the mystery of what it is to be human and what it is to be male and female, and how it is that male and female together and distinctly show forth the image of Christ. And I think that last step is something that faithful Orthodox who are dedicated to the tradition and care very much about the witness of the fathers need to think more clearly and carefully about, so that we cannot just simply say this is what the church teaches, but also this is why the church teaches us. This is what it means to be male and female. These are some of the things that we can see about being male and female, both distinctly and together. And this is why, for example, Paul speaks about the mystery of a marriage being a mirror or an icon, or related to the mystery of Christ in the church. This is what he means by this. So I'm not sure that the third thing has been done in any depth. There have been a few who have attempted it. I think of Pauly Dokimov's two works, the second one not finished, but the first one, Woman and the Salvation of the World. I'm not sure I agree with everything that he does, but I think he's asking the right questions. So my hope would be that rather than capitulating to the world or trying to compromise, that the challenges that we're meeting today about these questions would drive us to think more deeply about these questions, just like the Arian controversy drove people to think more clearly about how we define who Jesus is in relationship to the Father, and how he has a divine and human nature, but there's one person, and so on. I think that there are things that we need to be thinking about and working on, those of us who are in theology and in biblical studies and in patristics, in order to help to answer the why question for those who want to go that deeply. So, I mean, I kind of tried to do this as an overture in my last chapter on C.S. Lewis, because he deals with these things too. And I'm not sure he's right in everything that he says, but I think, again, like Abe Dokimov, he's asking the right questions. So in my last chapter, I tried to set up boundaries around that will keep us safe as we ask these questions of, how are male and female made in the image of God? Are masculine and feminine bigger realities than the physical male and female? What kind of continuity and discontinuity is there between what we are now in our gendered conditions and what we will be in the age to come? Why is it that our tradition allows for the ordination of certain men to the priesthood, but women are more typically considered as prophets and mothers? Those kind of questions, I think, are things that need to be asked, but faithfully and within the tradition. And I think it's something that the questions have not been asked deeply in the past, because we just haven't met the same challenges as we are meeting now. Metropolitan Kallistos speaks about, is it Finland? I think so, where he says that in Finland there wouldn't be a problem with a homosexual man being received to communion, and he implies that that's a good thing.
And it did seem, particularly after Metropolitan Kallistos forward, it did seem to embolden the lobby coming out of, like Orthodoxy and Dialogue, Public Orthodoxy. And there seems to be a huge debate at the lay level, but there seems to be some sort of hesitation from the bishops.
Mm-hmm.
So how could our clergy and our hierarchy in general, what can they do differently to really just stop the spread of this heresy, really?
Well, I mean, I think they need to not be afraid to speak, but I do think also that they need to commission those in whom they trust to delve into patristic and biblical reasons why we hold the positions that we do, because that's where the questions are coming. The kind of some of the questions, and some of them are disingenuous, some of them are not honest questions, but the kind of questions you get are, who says this? Has God really said this? Are these things that we've said cultural, or are they for all time? And it seems to me that they need to hold the line. They need to not be afraid to speak out, but they also need to draw upon the resources of those who will spend the time to do the legwork of looking precisely at what the fathers had to say. I mean, one of the things that I was a little dismayed about in the same edition of the Wheel that Metropolitan Kallistos gave the forward to, the one that I responded to, we had the theologian Andrew Louth, whom I greatly respect, unfortunately saying that there's no point in going to the fathers about this because they had a dim view of sex anyway. Well, that's just not good enough. We need to look at the principles that they used, and we need to look at what they had to say, and we need to take seriously what they had to say for today. And I don't think that this comes through dialoguing with those who are asking the questions, has God really said this? I've been there, I've done that. I did this in the Anglican Church. This kind of dialoguing, in my view, is pointless, because I don't think that the questions that are being asked by most of the folks on the who are on the other side are honest questions. They're questions intended to really batter down those who hold the classical and conservative position. So it's artificial then to have, a few people who call themselves Orthodox but are living in a homosexual lifestyle, other academics who are either who've either sold into the revisionist position or who are considering it, and then just a few conservatives. That doesn't really represent the church. It's an artificial, balanced discussion, and I don't think that it really commends itself to us for careful thought, because you're constantly playing tennis back and forth, batting the same questions and the same balls around, rather than actually able on a solid foundation that you agree on to dig into these questions that I was talking about. So I think we need some discussion, but I think that we need some discussion among those who are already committed to the conservative position, not to question it, but they want to understand why. Why does the Bible say this? Why does the tradition say this? Why did the fathers say this? And now how can we teach that today in all compassion and all humility and in all truth?
Basic teaching within the Orthodox Church on sexuality is, in my view, not controversial at all. It's very clear. We teach that sexuality is a gift from God and that it can be a source of grace and holiness, but it is to be used only within the sacrament of marriage between a man and a woman. Now, that teaching, in my view, has not changed, but that, of course, means that all sexual activity, whether heterosexual or homosexual, outside marriage is, in the teaching of the Orthodox Church, not approved of. And that's where the problems arise, that this is challenged by the society around us, and how far should we conform to the standards of the secular world in which we're living.